Hello, everyone. Welcome to Homeland Security Today. My name is Kristina Tanasichuk. I'm the executive editor of HSToday. And today we're honored to speak with Chief Chris Clem, a 27-and-a-half-year Fed and former Chief Border Patrol agent supporting law enforcement. In December, Chief Clem answered a critical call from the incoming Trump administration to step in during the first 100 days and help reform the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, HHS ORR, in the fight against child trafficking. So in just 100 days under his leadership, the team reorganized operations, changed key policies and practices, and reprioritized child protection, ensuring aggressive pursuit of traffickers and the resolution of a massive backlog of cases. Thanks to these efforts, investigative leads and prosecutions are actively ongoing, and lasting structural changes have been put in place to prevent such atrocities from happening again. Chief Clem, welcome.
Thank you. I'm just excited to be here and happy to talk about such an important topic.
Thank you for your service and leadership on this, because I think I am also on the board of the Traverse Project, which is an anti-human trafficking organization. And I'll tell you, it's a very challenging topic. So having you come in and actually solve some challenges, we definitely wanted to spend some time with you and learn, more about what you did, and certainly about how we can together solve the human trafficking and child trafficking challenges. So first, I think for the audience, what does ORR do?
Well, it's a great question because sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. Why Health and Human Services? Why Office of Refugee Resettlement? Why are they involved in the border? And really, it comes down to the Office of Refugee Resettlement was established in 1980 specifically for refugees that were from around the country, and it was established under President Carter. And over the years, it evolved. And if you kind of think about what was going on in history back in the 60s and 70s, we had a lot of people migrating, boat people. We had from Vietnam. We had, still had Cuban issues with refugees. So it was necessary. And in the late, I guess 1999 into 2000, there was a conversation about how they were going to manage this as we looked at the way the Immigration and Naturalization Service was involved. Well, unfortunately, we had 9/11. And so when the Homeland Security Act and the development of DHS was put together, they actually removed the unaccompanied alien children program that sat with INS and was put into Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. So they have two primary functions: to welcome in and set up and resettle refugees that are determined by the State Department. And then they are responsible by law under the Homeland Security Act, as well as the Trafficking Victims Protections Act, TVPRA, for the placement and well-being of all unaccompanied alien children that are encountered by federal law enforcement. 99% of these cases originate at our southwest border when children cross the border illegally, and that's anybody 17 or younger that is not with a parent or legal guardian. They must be placed with the Office of Health and Human Services Refugee Resettlement. Now, I mean, that is law, and that's the way it is. And it's crazy because you can be an 18-year-old boy with his 16-year-old little brother. And unless the 18-year-old has legal guardianship, which most of the time they don't, they actually get separated. That 16-year-old gets placed in ORR, and the 18-year-old gets processed as an adult. And so these are congressional laws. They're the ones that put this in place. They haven't updated that in decades, or at least 4 or 5 years when they had the last time they reauthorized it. And it puts a lot of pressure on ORR to do the right thing. Well, the right thing is actually vetting and making sure any placement of a child is appropriate. And in the last 4 years in the Biden administration, we know those numbers of unaccompanied children were, I think, approximately 480,000. 480,000 unaccompanied children crossed the U.S. border illegally. And I was shocked to see a number, shocked, not necessarily surprised, but in April of 2021, within 100 days of Biden's administration, we placed over 18,000 children into sponsorship in just 1 month alone early on in the administration. So it is the responsibility to put the children in the safest, least restricted type environment. Obviously, we prioritize their parents and family members. And then a third category would be, let me just go back for the record. The first category of a sponsor would be an adult parent or legal guardian. A second category would be an adult family member, maybe an aunt, uncle, or grandparent or cousin. And then the third would be an unrelated adult. And then lastly would be an ORR foster care system. So it's our job at ORR to make sure that we appropriately place those kids in those settings when they've come across illegally. So hopefully that kind of gives you a level set of what we're doing for further conversation.
So when you got the call, what were some of the challenges that you came to solve? And then what kinds of improvements did you make in that first 100 days?
Well, when I got up there, it was obvious we had a whole bunch of kids. There were several 100,000 of people that had entered. And one of the biggest things we saw were the fact that as we peeled back layers of the cases that were in sponsor application, we realized that there was so much missing information. There was an OIG report that went back from last year that mentioned that ICE, who does the law enforcement side of this, cannot find almost 300,000 kids. Well, that's because the information that ICE received on the initial entry and processing, and then the ORR placement was missing or lacking or was fraud. And so how do we find that these kids are even alive? Number two, are they safe? Are they, number three, going through their immigration system? Do they have a safe environment? So we had to go back and start reviewing all of the previous cases from the administration. And we found so many of them that were lacking documentation, lacking basic information. Some of the addresses that the field specialists went to, show that there was no structure at this location that was given. So therefore, there's no kid or sponsor. And they became ghosts. And so now we have to kind of go back and go through almost all of those cases that OIG mentioned and start piecing things back together and working with law enforcement. Because let me make sure everybody understands, when you're dealing with an unaccompanied child, especially those that are younger age, like 12 and younger, they cannot make independent decisions. They are being trafficked. That is a criminal situation. Obviously, smuggling across the border is criminal, but everybody involved with that child is committing a crime at that point. And so when they submit an application, I don't care if it is their family, that is a crime because you are trafficking a child across the border. And so you start peeling back layers in a sampling in the first few weeks of the administration, this Trump administration, we found like over 70% of the applications were fraudulent. They had some kind of misinformation, lacking information, different social security numbers on different for the same person on different forms. So that was the biggest challenge, is because ICE, who would be going up and following up to find these kids and going after the sponsors, literally had a bunch of cold cases. And so we had to start going back and reviewing every little piece of data and connecting dots and working with local specialists and field agents and other agencies to make sure that we could start piecing things back together so the investigators, the criminal investigators, can go out there and, number one, find the kids, but also pursue criminal actions on these sponsors. So that was a lot, but my commitment to the administration was we were going to put the practices and policies in place so what we inherited would never happen again. I've mentioned this before, President Trump and Make America Great Again, and Secretary Kennedy is Make America Healthy Again. Well, that also includes our agencies, and so making our agencies healthy is by doing things the right way. So we had to do some what I call common sense approaches that are truly compassionate to make sure that we're taking care of the kids. And it's as simple as making sure the sponsors have valid documentation, identification documents, very similar to all our I-9 requirements by law for any application for employment or anything else. You and I have to submit verifiable documents. That was one. The adult sponsor must be fingerprinted to include any adult household members. There are cases out there that I can't openly speak about because they're under investigation, but where there are multiple adult household members that are criminals, that are convicted traffickers, and we placed them. The previous administration placed them. So we said, no, if you're an adult, you must submit an affidavit or information that says, here's the only adults in the house and their fingerprints. Otherwise, you're lying, and that's a criminal offense, lying to a federal officer. Biometric data, if some of the documents aren't there, we want to make sure that we do DNA testing when that's available. Home visits and following up with the sponsors to make sure that it's met. A laundry list of things that we put into place that were very, very common sense, almost mirroring our U.S. domestic foster care system. We're talking about children here. So you need to provide proof of residency, proof of income, verify your driver's license or other legal government document, fingerprints to know that you're not a criminal. All those things you and I would have to do if we were going to adopt a child. I do not want anybody receiving what I'm about to say as dehumanizing, but this is really what it boils down to. My wife and I adopted our pit bull from a rescue community shelter in the county. We had to provide our driver's license. I had to provide a proof of income and proof that I had a home to adopt a dog that was about to be euthanized. Now, I am not relating children to animals, but if I had to do that to rescue a dog that was going to be euthanized, I think it's the minimum we could do if we are truly going to protect children and be a welfare for children agency that ORR was put on the books to do. So again, you have to go through more hoops in the past, more hoops to rescue a dog than you were to sponsor a child. Again, not to sound dehumanizing, but
I couldn't agree. Well, I don't know the process at ORR as well as you do, but I do know the process of adopting a dog, and it is strenuous.
Yes.
And it seems to be getting more so every day. So
yeah. And we weren't taking those same follow-ups with children.
Yeah.
And if somebody followed up with a phone call or a home visit and nobody answered, they just went ignored. And there's other things I can talk about, but it's just ridiculous that this was allowed to happen.
Well, it sounds like you put in the structure to be able to track those kids. And that's monumental as well, because when they say that they can't find all these kids, of course, that looks terrible for everyone, but particularly for the kids and their parents. So it is, that's a huge step forward. And tell us a little bit, I mean, you went up, you did the job and you left. So tell us about how you pulled that off.
Well, I want to also kind of just piggyback off the last statement you were making, and I think it's important too. Part of the thing I pulled off, I guess, is we got law enforcement engaged on the front end as well. So now, because President Trump has secured the border. I mean, we went from over 10,000 arrests a day in Biden to less than 250 a day now with Trump. So every unaccompanied child, and let me tell you that those numbers average about 10 a day now compared to 330 a day under the last administration. Every unaccompanied child, there is a ICE special agent will come and do an interview. So so the vetting process starts right there. So when they come in, they've got an address of a family member to contact, ICE is showing up and knocking on those doors. So we're going to know on the front end, and our specialists in the field, those, back to what I was able to accomplish in 100 days, the intake officers, this field specialists that are going to look at the cases and talk to the kids. I mean, they understand the gravity that is surrounding this situation. And so we've already seen cases where, applicants have put forth or sponsors have put forward application, and the checks and balances we put in, we flagged it, notified law enforcement, those kids remain, where in the past they would have said, oh, here's a copy of a driver's license, they're good to go. So we put that in place right off the bat. We also are working directly within the parameters of the law. We sit there with other law enforcement agencies now, and we review these cases. So as soon as we see a flag, we are able to take that right to a special agent sitting in the room with us, who can review it for law enforcement leads and then send that out to the field. So we have things done in real time to number one, if it's happening right now, we can act on it quickly. And number two, it's going to aid and abet the whole prosecutorial process. And number three, which is also important, it sends a very clear message to the criminal networks that we are not going to tolerate this, as well as any employees that may have been complicit, that if you are knowingly and willingly allowing this and there's some kind of crime involved, not only are you going to lose your job, you may get prosecuted. So we really set that tone. And as you and I kind of
you jumped the gun and answered my question. I wanted to ask you what your message was to the traffickers and what you want them to hear loud and clear. And there you're answering it already. But
well,
that's incredibly important.
Well, I really, to kind of answer the question, I kind of, begged around it here, but really that first 100 days, and you and I talked about early on before we started recording, was it was about, I knew I had to come in here with the figuratively or literally speaking or figuratively speaking, or whatever that term is, with a sledgehammer, right? We had to bust things up in the sense of the policies and practices were not working and they were endangering children. And so we were very transactional when we first got there. We were making monumental changes in the form of reorganization. The department was going through a lot of stuff too, with major rifts, and we had a lot of stuff come in with the Doge teams that were looking at everything. We were laser focused on what can we do to prevent this from happening again? What can we do to solve the existing problems? And how do we get it done in rapid succession? So that's what we did. We had to remove people. We had to reorganize people. We had to redesign the process. We looked at everything and was very transactional early on. I would say the first 30 to 40 days was very transactional. But then it's like the aha moment happened. And everybody realized, because part of this administration, and certainly under Secretary Kennedy and President Trump, is radical transparency. So we exposed to our workforce what we were up against. Some of them had no idea what was happening or what was allowed to happen while they were working there. Again, the way it was designed, it was a lot of check boxes, and people weren't looking at the human side of this. They were looking at the transactional process, documents uploaded, this has been checked. They didn't realize, or they've been told, oh, we're helping bringing families together, which face value sounds great. But when you say, well, not really families, trafficking, and this is what's happening, a lot of them were just the look of horror on their face that they were part of this. And so you had that transformation where they were all in. The team that we put together were all in. And then we started peeling back more layers. And this is public information because it was put out on the X account a few weeks ago. But we found 65,000 notices of concerns dating back since August of 2023 that were never actioned. And a notice of concern can be anybody associated with the child during and post release from ORR. And it can range from, the child calling on the phone and saying, my sandwich bread was stale, I don't like it. Or my sponsor took away my Game Boy. Or unfortunately to, I'm being assaulted, or this person is being mean to me, or a neighbor said this little child has come home with bruises. There's so many things that it ranges from, but they went unanswered. And we put another team together to go through every one of those, we call them knocks, notices of concerns. And I can tell you, I left, on May 2nd, And at that point, we'd been actioning these things for about 3 or 4 weeks, and we had reduced them by 15, 16,000 already. Collated them, reconciled them. Some of them were duplicate. Some had already been part of a previous case, but there were 65,000 chances that we could have made a difference in somebody's life that went unanswered. And so, again, we put a practice and procedure in place. As those knocks continue to come in, they're immediately actioned, they're immediately followed through. And sometimes that means, case closed because it's just, something that was just a bogus call, or it's follow up with child protective services, local law enforcement, or if necessary, federal law enforcement. So we put all these things in place, again, like I said early on, to prevent this from ever happening again. And because I don't, if you just, anybody, regardless of your political leanings, if you think that allowing somebody, especially a child, to be placed with somebody that hasn't been vetted, hasn't been properly, secured, the facility they're going to be placed in or the home, that's just repulsive and unfathomable to me. Regardless of where your leanings are, it's about the safety and the welfare of these kids that have already, crossed the border.
Right. You have to protect those kids. And that's certainly, it's been an issue throughout around the border security debate, what happens with the children and then showing pictures and all kinds of things. And really the devil's in the details, and those processes being out of whack or just being lazy. A lazy process that doesn't pay enough attention to what's going on can be incredibly harmful. So I really want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I was thrilled to see your post and really wanted Homeland Security Today to chat with you about how you were able to improve these processes, because it can be done. You need doers like you. You need people with experience. And we thank you on behalf of those kids and certainly on behalf of the country. So we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.